George Eugene Boston had a miserable home life, with a stepmother who maligned and abused him and constantly told him he was worthless. With a childhood like that, you can either succumb or you can become strong, independent, and determined to succeed. George chose the latter. At 18, he left home with 2 pairs of jeans and $83 in his pocket. He went to Springfield, Missouri, attended George Washington University, sometimes going to school during the day, and sometimes working at night, and sometimes the other way around. Then he left. Being George, he said everybody went west, so he went east to New York City. When he first arrived, he rented a room in an apartment on West End Avenue with a woman who had a circle of intellectual, educated friends, many of whom were retired English professors. They took him in, watched out for him, and mothered him for the first time in his life. One of the first adventures for this hillbilly in New York City was on the subway. He studied the map, so he knew where he wanted to go. As he descended the series of staircases to the tracks, he lost awareness of north, south, east, and west. No problem, he thought. When I get back on the street, I'll figure it out. So when he alighted and looked for the sun to get his bearings, there was no sun to be seen because of all the tall buildings. So he decided to go to a bus stop. And he saw a bus stop, no standing. So he carefully walked outside of the bus zone so no one would catch him standing. And he saw all these people standing under the sign that said no standing. And he said, what kind of place is this? Don't they see the sign? And he paced back and forth until the bus came, and then he safely went right through the forbidden zone and got on the bus. George got a job in computers at the beginning of the industry, working on mainframe computers when they took up a whole room with raised floors, wiring under the floor, punch cards, and green and white reams of paper printouts. He loved it and was very, very well suited to it. He eventually rose to the position of computer consultant and was sent out to important clients like Swiss Bank to design their systems. He thrived on the work and was proud and happy doing it. He became a New Yorker, renting an apartment in Brooklyn Heights. I met him skiing at Sugarbush, Vermont, in a big old farmhouse that was a group house of people who worked in Manhattan and drove up to Vermont on Fridays to ski and cook and party together. We met the week before Christmas in 1967 and got married in September of 1968. We were quite opposite when we met. I was overprotected, and he had never been protected at all. I went to a high school of 5,200 students. He went to a one-room schoolhouse. I am Jewish. He was dragged to Baptist churches. He stopped going as soon as they stopped dragging. On our way to a Seder to meet my family the first time, driving on Long Island Expressway in my Volkswagen bus, he asked me, is this one of those religious things where I have to stand up and say, have I been saved? No, I said, just ask for seconds on the food and they'll love you. On one of our first dates, I took him to a Chinese restaurant, and he started pushing food around the dish. What's this? What's this? He said, and where I come from, we refer to Chinese restaurants as ptomaine palaces. I said, I don't know what those things are, but I like you, and I'm not trying to poison you. Just eat it and enjoy it. And he later became an excellent Chinese cook. Less than a year after we married, we quit our jobs drove across the states, stopping in Nebo, Missouri, population 25, to visit his mother and grandparents in the small farmhouse where he lived until he was taken to his stepmother's house at age 4. We continued on to San Francisco, sold our car, bought airline tickets to Australia, got migrant papers, and took off through the Pacific. We traveled through Tahiti, Fiji, New Caledonia, New Zealand, and arrived in Sydney in September of '69. We went out looking for work, and we had $12 left the day we both found jobs. I taught English as a second language to adults, and George worked in computers as we had done in New York City. After 6 months, George was frustrated with his work, so we joined a group of young Australians who were planning to drive from India to London, half the circumference of the planet. As a group, we shipped a new VW minibus and an old Peugeot sedan to Madras, southern India, and we met there in a few weeks. We drove through Pakistan and India for 3.5 months. Then we continued on through Afghanistan, Iran, and Turkey. The others had money, but we did not. So many times they rented rooms in a hotel, and we slept in our sleeping bags on the veranda of their hotel or in the bus. They bought carpets, and we took photos of them. We ended up with 850 slides of our travels. In Turkey, George turned yellow with hepatitis. So we went on the overnight boat, steerage class to Athens. We had planned to go to Europe, take the train to England, get jobs, and then come back and see Europe. But George was in the hospital for 3 weeks, which canceled those plans. I was going to get us home. However, the day he came out of the hospital, I turned yellow. It was infectious hepatitis. So we called my parents, they sent us money, and we came home to New York City. They cared for us for about 8 months until we were well enough to resume our own lives. We bought a small co-op apartment in Brooklyn Heights, later sold it and bought a 4-story 1867 landmark brownstone in Park Slope. It needed quite a lot of renovation. When my father saw it, he said, "You paid money for this?" George did most of the work. He flue-lined the fireplaces from the ground floor to the roof. He laid a tongue-and-groove oak parquet floor in the dining room. He devised a way to imitate the antique plaster moldings on the ceiling and repaired anything else he could find. When I asked him how he knew what to do, he said, "I look at it, and it tells me what it needs." I told him when I look at it, it says, "I'm broken. Call someone." After we had renovated the upper duplex and had tenants upstairs, and I thought we were safe, George was diagnosed with leukemia in 1992. One day, he told me that he wanted to go upstate, build a passive solar house, and start a winery in the cellar. So we did. After he left his computer consulting job and apprenticed himself to a winery in the Hudson Valley for a couple of months, we started his little project. Ours was called Woodstock Winery, and the first year, our first vintage was 1983, we made 1,000 cases of white wine. That's 12,000 bottles. We had a hand corker. We got very strong. And I was still working at the radio station in Manhattan. One day at my desk at WNCN, in an inside column of the Tuesday Science Times, I saw an article reporting on first trials for an experimental drug for leukemia in La Jolla, California. I got him into the program, and 8 months later, we had a miracle. normal blood cell count, and George was cured. He said, when death knocks on the door, don't answer. We had sold the brownstone, bought a studio apartment on 37th and Madison. We're building a house near Woodstock, New York, and we're working in the winery. I was still working in Manhattan, so I came up on Friday afternoons and returned to the office early on Monday mornings. He stayed upstate and continued building and making wine, except for the times we sold the wine in the Union Square Farmers Market on Wednesdays and Saturdays. We won a couple of medals, which I have here, for our Sable Blanc and our late harvest dessert wine. We enjoyed that beautiful passive house for 21 years with no furnace. In 1995, George was diagnosed with Parkinson's disease. It was somewhat benign for years, and then symptoms started appearing. Difficulty walking, slower speech, difficulty swallowing, but he stayed optimistic and strong, researching cures, health and dietary regimes, exercises, meditation, developing mantras of self-worth to undo the early abuse he suffered from his stepmother. Everything interested him, and nothing was too challenging. The more complicated, the better. He played classical and flamenco guitar. One night he rolled an 800-pound oak barrel filled with wine outside the winery by himself, so the freezing temperature would make the tartrates drop. I found volumes of notes on poker, bridge, stock investment theories, water and rain conservation, winemaking, golf exercises, and health cures. Only Spanish escaped his mastery. He studied it many, many times and decided that COBOL was his second language. At WNYC, I worked 5 blocks from the World Trade Center. After 9/11, from the window in my own office on the 25th floor, I could look right into the hole. 6 weeks later, I quit my wonderful job and went home to tell George I want to move to Mexico. He thought a minute and he said, I will follow you anywhere. So we put our house and apartment up for sale, sold everything we could, filled the car to the brink, and drove to San Miguel de Allende in November of 2001. We bought a house 3 months later and settled in to enjoy our retirement. He joined a golf club and played until 1 week before we were airlifted to the hospital in California on November 9th. He loved to eat good food, to cook, especially Chinese food, and a complicated three-page recipe of any cuisine was an interesting challenge for George. In rehab for 8 days in Cedars-Sinai Hospital, exhausted and emaciated though he was, fighting a massive infection, he focused and worked so hard. A courageous fighter to the end, he did not have any idea that we would not make it back from the brink again. He never considered giving up, and we both thought that we would return to San Miguel de Allende and continue his therapy. He was surprised when I told him I thought he was dying that last day. The last thing he told me was, I don't want to leave you. I don't know if there's anything after this life, but if there is, I will find him. I hope right now he's on a sunny, challenging golf course, hitting them long and straight. Courageous, determined, stubborn, strong and loving, he lived a full, happy life. We lost a precious man. Thank you.